In this demo, I will show how to mass create aggregates and growth rates year over year. What you see here are monthly growth rates by product family for two different measures at the customer level. If we look at the documentation of the dataset that I've prepared in advance, you see that I started from the fact table, sales history, and I've joined the product dimension and time dimension. And those dimensions are for pivoting purposes. Now, let me show you how the product pivot dimension was defined. I've used data manager component starting from the product table inside the database. It has a product ID, product name, and the family. I'm creating an aggregate to count the product ID, the key, in fact, and pivoted by the product family. So I need first to extract the values. And for family, you see we have 4 values available that will create 4 fields, and I can ask also for the total for all families. That will give me 5 fields that I will prefix with flag. Here we go. Let's make the name shorter. I also need to follow the same naming convention, for all families. So this is what I'm doing here. And actually this flag is returning a 0 or 1 value, and what I want is a null or 1 value. So I'm going to do a if expression to replace the 0 value with null. So I pick one of the flag field, use a wildcard to treat all the flags all at once with one formula. Test if it's equal to 0. If it is, I will replace with null. Else, I will keep the 1 value. That gives me 5 new fields that I will prefix with product in. I can now hide the flag fields that I don't need for the final data set. Let's see the data with a preview. So for all families, it's always 1, but then for each column corresponding to one family, we have 1 or null, depending whether the product is in that family or not. I can hide now the product name and family that I don't need. So what I did is I copied the SQL corresponding to this pivot fields to make a view, a SQL view inside the database directly. And I've done the same for the time dimension. So I created in advance a data manipulation on top of the calendar table, and I've pivoted the months, I pivoted the quarter and the semester as well to create flags. And I added a couple of flags to understand the reference year and the previous year. So this is a rule I've used for based on the current date to compute the reference year. You could use a different rule, of course. And again, if I look at the data, you will see same principle. We return 1 or null, depending whether the day is within a given month or not. The column all months is always 1, of course. And I also pivoted on quarter, so that allows me to also pivot on the quarter if I want to do quarterly aggregates or growth rates. And I've done that also for semester. Okay, so that's what I've defined in advance, and I save the SQL of this data manipulation again as a SQL view. So now I can create my data manipulation starting from my sales history. So I have 2 years of history for sales. So we have the order date, the customer ID, the product ID, and a couple of measures. I will put a suffix on the measures. You will see why in a minute. Now I will merge the 2 dimensions I've prepared, which are views actually. So if I browse my catalog in the database, I have one view for product with pivots, with pivot fields. So the join is on the product ID column. And let's now get the time pivot view. So for time, I have the choice between 2, so rolling year or calendar year. So in my case, calendar year is working fine. So the join is done on the ABAP date, which is a string format of the date, because this is how the fact table is defined. So now let's start from the entity key, which is customer, and hide everything else. So I will toggle the selection and hide everything else than the customer ID. And now I'm ready to create my aggregates or my growth rates around the customer. And for that, I go to the expression editor and start by doing a sum aggregation on the measure amount sold. But I want to do it for all measures. So I'm using a wildcard $ times. I will use a pivot around product families, so games, for instance, and replacing games with a second wildcard times picking 1 quarter, right? So if I apply a Cartesian product here, that will give me 10 fields, 2 measures times 5 product families and 1 quarter. If I use a third wildcard for quarter, now I have 50 fields. Or maybe I want all aggregates, quarter, semester, and months, so that will give me even more fields. But actually, let's stick to, let's use monthly aggregates for now, and times the reference year flag. So my formula is complete to get the aggregate. So at this stage, I have the aggregate, monthly aggregates for the reference year. But I want to compute the change, so I pick the same formula and replace reference year by previous year. That gives me the change year over year. And you may prefer computing the percentage change, so you can do that easily to divide by the previous year total. Okay, so a single formula. I'm going to generate year-over-year fields. So you can see the same list as you saw at the beginning of the video, right? If we look at the SQL generated, the nice thing about when you are using ratio, the tool is taking care of the cases for division by 0. So you will not have division by 0 error. By default, the tool is proposing left outer join, but it's okay if you want to use inner join if you have the referential integrity for that. So you pick the SQL and you can adjust it. Let's run the SQL to see what the result here is. So 1 row per customer ID, the entity key, and the different growth rates by product family over different months.